hearts. Let's join together and let our praises rise to our God.
The Lord is the one defending me. Does it matter who attacks me? Does the color of night matter when the Lord is my light? Does the opposition matter if it's for me the Lord will fight? Yesterday's monsters, today's doubts, and tomorrow's fears, they gather around and whisper their threats in my ears. They collude for my destruction. They long for my downfall. They build opposition and build up a dark wall. Their thought is to imprison me. How sweet that they expect me to admit defeat. But I'm not the one who's doing the fighting. No, that role belongs to the Lord Almighty, the one who changes yesterday, decides today, and controls tomorrow. Is the same one who holds me in his arms and comforts me in my sorrow. I can't be afraid of the enemy. I'm too busy being loved by God, being carried by his word and covered by his blood. Oh, that I could spend all my days looking in your eyes, not listening to the world as the enemy spews his lies, but looking in your face, marveling at your grace, getting lost in your embrace. Oh, that I could commit every space to being in your dwelling place, to be hidden in your love and sheltered by your peace, surrounded by a joy that can never ever cease, to sit on your mountain just like Moses did, to lie in your arms and never have to live. You have invited me in. You have made an end to all my sin. You have made a sanctuary within. You have turned me to your next of kin. The world could conspire and turn against me, and even those I love could come to hate me. But no one can take you away. You are for me, come night, come day. When I'm in a mess or at my best, the world will still declare me blessed, for I'm covered in your righteousness. So here's what I believe. Here's what my journey will receive because of what my Christ achieved. I will see all that is good about God, all that is new about God, all that is true about God. Because of you, my beautiful Christ, my journey isn't written for willful strife, but to dwell in your presence every day of my life. So have courage. Have courage because God calls you his beloved. Have courage, for in Christ you have been reborn. Have courage, for your battles, they are fought. They are won. Amen.
I went into the building trade when I was 16 years old. It taught me so much about myself, about life, and about how I was to try and live out my faith on site. The job I loved more than anything else was labouring for bricklayers. I loved, as a young guy, hod carrying, knocking up the muck, trying to clamber up the ladder with all the bricks. I loved how it made me feel in terms of feeling fit, and I loved the job. I particularly enjoyed working for a bricklayer called Johnny Barra. I loved working alongside him because he was a master craftsman. Johnny would rock up on site in the morning in his red Mazda pickup truck. He'd get out and I'd see him pull out his bucket of tools, sling them on the end of his yellow Stabila level, and then just walk on site. He always looked so cool. I loved being with him. I loved hearing his stories about the different jobs that he'd been on. I loved watching him in the way that he buttered the brick and the way he seemed to lay the courses of the bricks effortlessly. I learnt so much from Johnny about what it was to be a bricklayer. Johnny ignited in me a passion for that particular craft, and it was the first time in my life that I bought books on the subject and read about building practices and started to study how others did it. I even bought 100 flattened bricks, they're common bricks, and I bought some sand and some lime, and in my parents' garage at home, I would over and over again practice the different elements of bricklaying. I'd take hold of my trowel and I'd practice the art of rolling the muck on the board and swishing it so it came off smoothly and not all over the floor. I'd practice buttering the brick and putting them together. I'd practice with the level, trying to hold it with my foot as I built a corner and got the bricks level. I'd even practice, like I'd seen Johnny do it, with my trowel, trying to look cool, spinning it in my hand. I practiced and practiced and practiced until I became not a master, but somewhat proficient as a bricklayer. Being formed into a bricklayer took repetitive practice. It took having somebody watch over you. It took making loads of mistakes until I became to the point where I was able to do it. It's the same for us who are trying to live the way of Jesus. It's the same for us who are trying to be Christians. A Christian is somebody who is learning to live the way of Jesus in their particular context at a particular moment in their lives. The Bible tells us that the goal of us being Christians is that we might become more like the person of Jesus. Sounds impossible, right? Sounds impossible, but Jesus believes it's absolutely possible. He chose his 12 disciples. A number of them were very ordinary guys who came to him with little knowledge, very little skill and ability, and very little belief in themselves. And he took these 12 young men and he formed a community that transformed the world. They learned by being with Jesus. They learned by observing and getting to do the things that Jesus did. They learned to try and put into practice the things they saw him doing. They learned to kind of evolve into being people that were like him. In Matthew's Gospel, at the end of a particular section, right near the beginning, Jesus lays out his manifesto for life, his way of living. And at the end of that particular part of the Bible, he tells this little story about two builders. It's called The Wise and Foolish Builders. It says this: "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." The crowds had just listened to Jesus as he lays out this manifesto for life. He's taught them about the best possible way to live. He's told them about who gets accepted in God's kingdom, that it's everybody. He talks to them about the challenge of relationships. He talks to them about murder. He talks to them about the hope that they might be salt and light in the world around them. He talks about not judging others. He talks about all these different things. And the people listening to him are on, as it were, the edge of their seat. They love what he's teaching because he's teaching them a different way to live. And then towards the end, he begins to say to them, but not everybody who tries to walk this way, and not everybody who takes on my name, as it were, will be very genuine. And then he tells this story about the builders. He said, some will be wise, but some will be foolish. He says the way to get this way of life into your life is to put it into practice. This story, The Wise and Foolish Builders, gave birth to probably one of the greatest songs that exists within the world of Sunday school. So many of us learned it when we were kids, about the wise man built his house upon the rock, and we do all these actions about how the streams rose up and the rains came down, and yet the house on the rock stood firm. And I can see Jim behind the camera laughing because Steve's not remembering the lyrics right. But then it goes on to say about how for the foolish man, he does the same thing. He builds his house, and then the rains come and the streams rise up. And we used to love it as boys in Sunday school right at the end, because we were allowed to kind of just do this. It just said the house on the sand went crash, and we used to just smack our hands as hard as possible. I think this was fantastic. If you looked at these two builders in this simple story, they looked exactly the same. The bricks they used were the same. The colour of the roof tiles was the same. The colour on their front doors was the same. Hague blue. Apparently it's the most popular colour in Balham. It's a Farrow and Ball paint. But the houses looked exactly the same, but there was something fundamentally different about them. The difference was that one of them put Jesus' teaching into practice as the foundation of his life. The other simply didn't. Stanley Hauerwas is a Christian thinker and writer. He says that being transformed into the person of Jesus is less a spectator sport and more like an apprenticeship, learning, he says, to lay brick. When he was 8 years old, his father, who was a bricklayer, taught him to lay bricks at 8 years old, at that tender age. But his father's purpose was not to teach Stanley about laying bricks. His father's purpose was to teach Stanley about what it meant to follow the way of Jesus, what it meant to be a disciple. His father was saying to his son, you have to practice over and over and over again until you become proficient or become good at your craft. Many of us think that we, like Jim was saying last week, we get fit by direct debit. We buy a church, a gym membership, not a church membership. We buy a gym membership, and yet we never go. Or we take up a musical instrument that we want to become a master of, but it's up in the loft or it's in the cupboard gathering dust. The art to learning the way of Jesus is to put it into practice, to develop that in our lives. I think for a lot of us as Christians, the culture we've grown up in, though, is one that is a bit of a spectator sport. We go to church, we listen to the pastor preach, we nod or we nod off, and we are familiar with the drill, and we walk away from the service feeling spiritually fit. But in reality, we're flabby. We're no different than we were before. Jesus says the thing that makes the difference is the practice. The wise and the foolish builders, their lives get exposed by the storm. Same looking buildings, but what exposes them is the storm that they go through. The one that had built his life upon the foundation of Jesus' teaching, the one who had put it into practice, he sees his house, as it were, his life, remain firm when the storms of life come, whereas the fool who doesn't practice sees his life, his house, washed away. Not only do these guys' houses look the same, but notice too that the storm looks the same. They face the same challenges. So both of them see the rains come, the streams rise up, the wind battering against the side of the house. Being a Christian, seeking to live the way of Jesus is not going to make us exempt from the troubles of life. The difference is again what they have invested in, what they have practiced to be ready for those storms. I've seen some pretty poor practice in my time in terms of building work, and one of the worst was I saw a gang of ground workers, they're called, putting in a foundation for a house. Usually what you do is you mix 5 parts ballast with 1 part cement, mix it up in the mixer with the water, put it into the footing, and then you tamp it at the end. The building inspector comes around, looks at what you've done, and he either says okay or not okay as to whether you can build a house on it or not. These guys shoved all the ballast in the ground, literally took a bag of cement, cut it open and dusted it on the top, poured some water on and tamped it so the top looked right, but underneath was just the ballast. The building inspector came along and okayed it because of what it looked like on the top, and then went away and allowed a house to be built on it. I can't imagine what the state of that house was within a few years of it being built with the foundations like that. On one occasion, Jesus is with his disciples in a boat, and there's a storm around them. Jesus is asleep, and the disciples wake him up, and they say to him, well, don't you know what's going on around us? And Jesus says to them, well, where is your faith? He didn't mean that they didn't have it. He just said, now is the time to put it into practice. The difference for these builders was that one of them had put it into practice, and when the storm came, he was ready. His life was ready. He managed to ride his way through the storm and remain strong through it. Perhaps what we need to develop as a community in our spiritual formation is more a karate studio rather than a college lecture hall. One guy, Mark Scandretti, came up with this idea of the Jesus Dojo. In Japanese, a dojo is a place that you go, or it's called a place of the way. It's how a group of people come together to practice the way that they want to live. In Balam, I see it all the time. These people go into their classes, go into their yoga classes, and they go dressed in the gear, ready to take part, with their water bottle under their arm and their roll mat over their shoulder. They're going ready to practice. Our desire, as we work our way out of lockdown, is that we feel led by God to become a more consciously practicing community. That we might come together as a community ready to practice. Not coming together to listen to a lecture, not coming together just to, did I hear my favourite songs or not, but coming together, as it were, with water bottle in hand and roll mat ready to say, I'm ready to practice. And so from next week, we're going to try and experiment with our first practice. We're going to spend 6 weeks together looking at the practice of prayer. And this time, particularly looking at the challenge of the practice. So can I encourage you to be ready for it, whether you join us from home or whether you join us here in our church building. Come ready with a posture that says, I'm coming ready to practice. And perhaps, why not join us, as some of us are going to get with others during this time, to try and practice together. Find a friend to go through this with. Try and find maybe a life group. We've got a number of them, or you might even want to begin one through this time. Join with a group as we work together to try and develop the practice of prayer together. Jesus' point in this whole story that he looks at, this little story, is that this little story, the wise and foolish builder, is that putting his teachings into practice is not merely an option for us, but it's the difference. It's the difference between safety and destruction.
I wonder, as you hear that today, I wonder how it resonates with you. I wonder what it makes you think of. Just to help us think, we felt in terms of responding to what we heard today, whether at home or, as it were, in this house, we might give space to practice sharing with each other what we Christians would call something like testimony. And I wonder what's helped you over this last year weather the storms that you've gone through, weather the things that you found difficult. The reality for me, when I look at this story of the wise and foolish builders, it's a story I've known since I was a child. And even before just I preached this message, I used to think, well, the wise guy, he's the good Christian. He's the one who does what Jesus tells him to do. The foolish one is, as he says, is the fool. But the reality is, I can be both. Often when you read the Bible stories, you can find yourself, and it's one of the ways to try and engage with it. You think, oh, I can be like that sometimes, but I can also be like that. The tendency as Christians can be, I want to be able to say to everybody else in the room, oh yes, I'm the wise builder. I always do. I pray every day. I read my Bible every day. I join my church community every week. I'm a good little boy or a good little girl. The reality is sometimes I practice the teachings of Jesus in my everyday life, and I do better going through the storms of life. But at other times, I don't. At other times, as a human being, if I'm being honest, I turn to other things and other habits rather than practice the things that Jesus tells me to practice. And then what I notice is when the storms of life come, my house, as it were, comes crashing down. Does that make sense? You kind of think, I do both of these. There are lots of different practices. The very thing we're doing right now, the practice of building into my life the habit of gathering together with my Christian friends, it's not going to church. We as a church have come together, whether we've come together in this place or come together by joining us online. And we've come to kind of practice with each other, to encourage each other, to remind ourselves of who God is and who we are in the light of that. And so I wonder, as you think about that today, whether you, as you look back on this year, think, yeah, my testimony would be, I went through, whether it's relational storms this year, or I went through financial storms, or I went through work storms, either having too much work to do or lost work, whether you went through the storm of losing a loved one, whether this COVID-19 continuing storm that we are dealing with has affected you in particular ways. Whatever storm that you've gone through, I wonder, as you look back, would you say, gosh, these practices or these things really help me to get through? For some of us, it might be connecting with our church community online. For some people, it might be that was the thing that just held me. It may be that listening to particular kind of music held you. It may be that you have the practice of daily reading the Bible devotionally, and that really helped you, and you actually found particular bits of the Bible, parts of the Bible, sections of it helpful. It may be that getting together with a friend who's a Christian, when you were struggling, you phoned them up, and that support got you through the storm. So what we're going to do just for a little while is, whether you can join in with this, whether you're watching from at home, and I know there's a slight delay, so we'd encourage you to crack on with it. But if there's a testimony you have where you say, what I found helpful during this last year was, and if those at home use the live chat feature like some of you have been doing already, just type in a sentence that says, this is what I found helpful going through the storm of this last year. And we'll read those out. And in the room, what we're going to do here is we're going to listen to a song. It's a reflective song. And while we sing, just whether the Spirit lays upon your heart, just whether you'd come up to the front and just share with people, this is, I went through this storm this year, and this is what I found helpful for me. And we'll give space for one or two people to share in the room. Does that make sense? So this is us practicing. This is what we want to become more. I so want us to move away from being a church community that go at church like it's a lecture hall. We rock up, sit in our pews. Yes, I like the songs, or no, I didn't. Yes, I like the message, or no, I didn't, and we go home. I'm done with that. I'm absolutely done with it. Come with your roll mat under your arm, your water bottle in hand, and come dressed, not so that everybody else thinks you look nice, but come dressed so that you can actually exercise your faith, if that makes any sense. Just come ready, is what I'm saying. So we'll listen to this song, we'll get up and engage with it. Just think, is there something that I've got as a testimony that I would share with people today? And then I'll get up and invite people to come and share that. So guys are going to lead us in a song now.
The Holy One is here.
There we go. So one or two folk have already begun to message in from at home and from their houses. So I'll read those out in a little bit. But it would be great just to take a moment and just to check. Jim, should I get folk to use this microphone or this one? This one. So I'll just quickly move it into the middle so that folk know where to come to. And you don't have to touch my dirty-handed mic. So when you come up, does that work there? Good man. Just come up and speak into that one, or from wherever you are. So yeah, if there are people that have got just short testimony, just to share with us of, yeah, this last year's been a bit of a storm, but these were the things that I found helpful. And just for 1 minute or 2 minutes, or whatever is for you, then just come up to the mic or share with us. Would be good. Anybody want to go? Or Mr. Don? Go for it.
Well, 2020, I think a lot of people have said, I'd like to take that out of my years of life. Just 2020, park it, go straight to 2021, where we are now. Back in February 2020, I got called into the office expecting to have my annual appraisal. So I came in with my pen and my pad and ready for that appraisal, and then was told that my job was at risk of redundancy. So I put my pen and my pad away and cried. I got home and then suddenly realized I will be out of work. And at 64, you suddenly think, what on earth do I do now? You can't retrain. Where am I going to fit in? How am I going to provide? But God says, hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And I ended up driving cars for a company, and it kept me going. And then Mum got ill, and I thought, oh, this is not really good, not looking good. And in June last year, she passed. And that was a real body blow. And I thought, God, throw me a life belt, for goodness sake. I am drowning. What is going to happen to me and my family? But he's always there to catch you when you are falling. And I think that is the hope that I think everybody should have, that they can look up when you are drowning, and God will throw you that life belt, and he will pull you in and pull you close, so that you can hear his rhythm, hear his heartbeat, and be in tune with him. And that is what's kept me going.
Thank you so much. That's great. Is there anybody else who wants to come and share a quick testimony? Come, Maria. And then Loren's going to come. We're going to have a queue. It's good. Go for it.
Morning, church. I think for me, the key thing has been, I work in the NHS. I'll stand back a bit from this mic. And it's been tough, really, really tough.
Just stand a bit closer.
A bit closer now? Okay, it's been really, really tough, really. Honestly, I worked in the NHS for over 40 years, and I've never seen anything like it. However, what has kept me going is to know that God's promises never fail. He never, ever fails us. And to stand here today and tell you that I've never seen a year like it in the NHS is actually, I'm sure there's more to come, but God never fails. So as a Christian, I've held on to the fact that his promises will protect us and keep us going. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maria is not only the only representative, but somebody who works in the NHS, so we're so grateful, aren't we, for all that folk have done in that area. It's been ridiculously crazy and continues to be such a challenging year. Lorraine, were you going to come up? Come running with Miss Pandora. No, fantastic. Here, there you go.
Okay, this is going to be a bit controversial, but that's never stopped me. I actually loved lockdown. I thought it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because, well, here's why. Long story short, before lockdown started, I used to work 2 jobs. I work here at the church, and I worked at Nando's. At my height, I was working 15 hours a day, from 7 in the morning to around 11 at night. So the plan was that my wife was going to get a full-time job, and I was going to quit Nando's. So she did. She got a new job. She loved it. It was great. Lockdown started. She lost it. So we were a little bit worried, because it's like, okay, I just quit my job. What am I going to do now? And then I called my boss up and told him the story, my boss at Nando's. And he just turned around and said, okay, don't quit. We'll pay you furlough. And then when you get your things sorted out with your wife, then you can quit. So I was getting paid to do a job that I didn't want, wasn't doing, but it was all working out pretty well. And then my wife got a new job. I quit my job. Lockdown's still going on. And then I just realized that I was so stressed. Yeah? I am talking. And I realized that, I realized that when I was enjoying my lockdown and having no job to go to, I kind of realized just how stressed and tired I was, working all those hours and all that. So I eventually just got around to doing some of the things I've always wanted to do when I have time, which is just read. So I think it was like month 3 of lockdown, and I thought to myself, man, this is just amazing. I'm getting paid. I've got nothing to do. I can just sit and chill and play with my daughter. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I get that everyone else is struggling, but for me, I am talking. For me, it was just a major stress relief, because it's like a double act, honestly. So for me, it was just a major stress relief, because I just kind of felt that everything's being taken care of for me. It's all going well. I get to spend time with my daughter, which is something I didn't get to do. And I just really, really enjoyed it. And she really enjoyed it, because she got to spend time with me, and I realized how difficult she is. Yeah, she was difficult. But I'm back at work now. And I'm...
Daddy?
No. Okay, I gotta go, because you can see why. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Lorraine. That's fantastic. Shay, were you going to come up? We've got a number of people who are messaging in from home as well, so perhaps after Shay, I'll share what some of those folk are saying.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see familiar faces. What got me through last year started off really bad at the end of 2019 into 2020, where I was in hospital, and I came out. But unfortunately, while I was in hospital, one of the NHS staff dropped my laptop, which wasn't a problem because it was an accident. But through the whole year, I wasn't working, I didn't work, couldn't get a result from the NHS to give me a laptop back, because I didn't have a laptop to email them backwards and forwards. So the whole year I hadn't worked, exhausted all my savings by paying my rent, etc., and trying to get through that. That was horrendous for me. But I had friends, I had neighbours, I had my hope and my belief that I knew I was going to get through. And going forward, still haven't had a result from the NHS, because only last week one of my friends bought me a laptop, which then enables me now to do all the things that I couldn't do last year, and bring myself into Zooming, messaging, and all these things that I couldn't do before. So for me, it was all hope, belief, neighbours and friends and loved ones all around. So that got me through last year. So thank you, everybody.
Bless you. Thank you. It's interesting as you listen sort of behind what people are saying. You know, I don't think there's been a year in my life where I've thought more about the practice of friendship and the importance of it, and how that works. A number of people are messaging in from home as well, and Isabel was saying that about the faithfulness and understanding and support of my life group. So we have within our church community these things called life groups, which vary in all sorts of ways, where small groups of people come together during the week to share with each other about the challenges of living the way of Jesus, to look at the Bible together. And Isabel's saying how much that's been a great support for her. Yvonne said, she said, I really like getting emails and WhatsApp messages from my church community. words of encouraging words through the pandemic. So I know Jim often and Lisa often wonders whether anybody reads these emails, but they have a number of people nodding in the room. They've been a huge support, keeping people in contact. I know my mum and dad are listening in from Frinton up in Essex today, and I'm sure it's for both of them. They say about a daily walk along the seashore at low tide, and I know that being out in nature for a lot of people has been a huge thing during lockdown to keep us going. Estriana says, what I find very helpful to me during this terrible time since last October, a dear friend of mine from school days, growing up in Jamaica, now lives in Florida, gives me encouragement. So again, the encouragement of friendship. Judy says about a WhatsApp group, which is called the Daily Word Family, sharing words of inspiration and supporting each other. Zainab talks about, she says, these are a few of the things that have kept me going through the daily audio Bible chronologically, listening and joining prayers online and joining exercises on YouTube have kept me going. And then Estriana comes back in, she says, my wonderful children and grandchildren have been a tower of strength to me every day. I never stop praying. And then Fumi says, connecting with the church family via Zoom has been really helpful too. These things that we've learned that perhaps we never thought we would learn, the connection with others. One of the things that was really important for me this year, and that's why I said, reading particular parts of the Bible, I've heard so many people say that the Psalms have been so helpful. The Psalms are a book in the middle of the Bible. One of the main writers, this guy called David, and they're just so real, so honest. But it's the way, and it was one of the greatest lessons I think I learned this last year, the importance of not listening to yourself, but talking to yourself. So if I listen sometimes to what's going on in between my ears, I crumble when I think about some of the thoughts that are going around and around. And a guy called Tim Keller, who's a minister and speaker, he says, we've got to stop listening to ourselves and start talking to it. Now that sounds a little bit of a funny thing to do, doesn't it? But what he means is the psalmist says, if you read the psalm, he says, why are you downcast, O my soul? And then he says, I will put my hope in God. Like he talks to himself. And sometimes to get the truth of scripture, of our faith into us, we have to kind of give ourselves a good talking to. Put your faith, trust Jesus in this moment. All these different practices. In the next few weeks, it's been mentioned already, in next week we're starting a series. So one of the things we wanted to do this year was look at some of the practices that help us to stay connected to our relationship with Jesus. Over here on our wall, here in the room here, we have a trellis with these plants on it, and this verse we have as a focus. This is not just to make the place look pretty. The trellis is a way in which a lot of spiritual writers talk about our practices, because the trellis is what's needed to give the plant the support it needs to grow. So whether it's the practice of gathering with Christians, the practice of meeting in a life group, the practice of devotionally reading the Bible, the practice of prayer, these practices are the trellis. And they help my life, my relationship with Jesus to grow. Does that make sense? And so we're thinking this year about some of those practices. And next week we're thinking about the practice of prayer. Now this is part 2 of a series that we've done. But this one, and I think it's the right time for this, looks at, well, what happens when it feels like my prayers are not being answered? How am I going to get through this? It's going to look at those kind of questions we all have about prayer, but perhaps have been too nervous to ask anybody else about. So we're going to start that next week. That'll be, and Andy's going to kick that off with a bit of an explanation or a message about the practice of prayer itself. And then after that, we'll start the course. So after that, you could join one of our life groups, perhaps just for this time, for 6 weeks, in order to get with other people who are trying to work out how you live this out. Lisa and I were talking during the week, and we've said, we currently recently haven't been in a life group, but we're going to run one or host one during that 6 weeks. But we're going to do it here at the church building on a Wednesday evening. I imagine that We'll put out proper information. I imagine it'll be from sort of 7:30 till 9 or something. But we'll meet here in the church building. That will be on I think it's the 23rd of June. And we have a couple of other groups that are meeting online or meeting in different ways at the moment. We'll make sure all that information is available. Or if you want to just do it from home and meet with a friend, then contact us at the church and we'll give you all that you need to know in order to be able to do that. Does that make sense? So we'd encourage you, just for that 6 weeks, to join in with one of those to help you really think about this practice of prayer. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. Nobody's looking at me like you've forgotten to say this, that, or the other. So we're going to just begin to end our time together by listening again to another song. So let's stand together as we do that.
Jesus, the name above every other name. Thanks so much for joining us today, whether you're in-house in our buildings or you're at home on the sofa. It's great to see you and to have so much interaction. It's been great to hear these stories from wherever we found ourselves over this last year. Stories of bereavement, of loss, of those grounding points in life, those foundations we might have lent on, whether it be close family relatives or jobs. The stresses and strains of everyday life, the way that sometimes in those things being taken away, it's helped us realize how busy and hectic our lives had become. Well, maybe this year we start to lean more on the trellis. Maybe this year we start to think about, well, what are the things that we can lean on when it feels like other things are taken away? How can we maybe rebuild our lives in a way that gives us strength and foundation for the future? I want to leave you with some words from Jude, but I want to remind you that Steve mentioned the Psalms. Do maybe go back this week and listen online again to Andy's piece of spoken word around Psalm 27. Maybe that's something you need to hear again this week as we prepare for this series looking at unanswered prayer. What does it mean? The end of the book of Jude says this. It's a letter, really. There's not much to it, but it's powerful. It says to him, this is to God, who is able to keep all of us from stumbling and to present all of us before his glorious presence without fault, with great joy. To the only God, our Saviour, be glory, majesty, power, and authority through Jesus Christ, our Lord, before all ages, now and forever and ever and ever. Amen.
Trust in